Penguin Random House Audio presents The Tree Collectors, Tales of Arboreal Obsession by Amy Stewart. Read for you by Jade Wheeler. On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. W.S. Merwin. Introduction. What possesses someone to possess a tree? 10 years ago, a man named Len Iserer introduced himself to me as a tree collector. He lived in Pennsylvania, where he had some acreage. He planted every kind of tree that struck his fancy, cramming them together as closely as he reasonably could. He told me that he had planted 150 different species and cultivars in rows, the way a book collector would line up books on a shelf. I remember thinking that trees were an odd thing to collect. They're large and difficult to move. Collectors' tastes can change over the years. If you're into toy cars or antique buttons, you'll grow tired of the more common ones and want to sell them off in favor of something rare and exquisite. But how do you do that when your collection consists of enormous, living, breathing organisms? Then I met Dave Adams from Boise, Idaho, whose collection of tropical trees couldn't survive the winter. At the first sign of snow, his guest room and garage became a sort of hotel for trees. He was completely out of space, but he still relied on a tropical tree dealer in San Diego to feed his habit. Now I knew 2 tree collectors. In 2019, the poet W.S. Merwin died, and his obituaries described the extraordinary collection of palms he'd assembled on his land in Hawaii. That was the final straw. Tree collectors were, pardon the expression, coming out of the woodwork. If I'd discovered 3 without trying, how many more would I find if I went looking? Plenty, as it turned out. Just like coin collectors or stamp collectors, tree collectors like to hang out with one another. They form clubs, they hold seminars and swap meets. They share pictures in online forums, and they go on field trips together. Whether you're obsessed with oak trees, maples, conifers, or magnolias, there's a tree society for you. I started hanging out in these groups and asking people if they would talk to me about their collections. At first, nobody could believe that I wanted to hear about them. Their friends didn't understand their compulsions. Their spouses had long since grown tired of tree talk. This is the reason they formed societies in the first place. As magnolia collector Beth Edwards said, no one else that I know in my career, or even in my family, really shares this interest of mine. I'm the only one. When I'm with the people in the Magnolia Society, I'm just another person. I'm normal. When I started talking to tree collectors, I thought that we'd have geeky horticultural conversations about rare cultivars and obscure subspecies. I expected to hear about trips to remote jungles and about proprietary techniques for grafting. I figured I'd meet indulgent spouses and puzzled neighbors. And there was all of that, but there was so much more. When you ask people to tell you about the one activity they do not for money, not out of necessity, but to indulge their deepest passions and their wildest curiosities, well, you're in for an intimate conversation. People told me about their childhoods and their earliest memories of trees. They told me about the parent or grandparent or neighbor who somehow had the foresight to hand an 8-year-old kid a field guide to, say, ginkgos or eucalypts. Some told me that planting their first tree helped them cope with unbearable loss. Some fell in love on tree collecting expeditions. Some said their collections helped them to reckon with the past or connect to their heritage. And everyone who plants a tree thinks about the future and about what lives on after they're gone. How often do any of us get a chance to pour our hearts out to a stranger? Somehow, talking about trees made it possible. By the end of every interview, I felt like I'd made a friend, but more than a friend, really. These tree collectors, my tree collectors, as I came to think of them, seemed more like some distant family I was meeting for the first time. Chestnut collector Alan Nichols told me that he was related to the chestnut tree through his mother. I felt that I was related to each of these collectors through their trees. I wanted several of them as surrogate grandparents. Quite a few could serve as cool cousins or quirky aunts. People who spoke no English at all, the botanist in Japan, the community organizer in India, came to seem like family, even when all I could do was sit quietly and let an interpreter handle the interview. You might think that 50 conversations with tree collectors would get repetitive, but I learned that no two tree collectors are alike. They're driven by their own highly individual desires and instincts. Some aim to conserve threatened species, others wish to restore the land. Some want to surround themselves with beauty, and some want to make a memorial or create art. Tree planting is a way to renew both the land and the person doing the planting. I started to see that the life of a tree collector is filled with adventure and wonder. It is a life well lived. It's also, like any other type of collecting, a way of expressing a singular obsession. Collectors tend to find a niche and try to possess everything that occupies that niche. This can be a lifelong pursuit. Oak collector Beatrice Chassé told me that this is why she knows so many octogenarians who share her obsession. Collecting is a passion, and that's what keeps people alive. Maybe it's futile, but I only wish that everyone could have such a futile activity. Because the reasons for collecting trees are so varied, I decided to group these collectors according to what I saw as their primary motivations. Healers have found a way to heal their own lives, the lives of others, or even the wounds of the past by planting trees. Artists have forged an art practice through their work with trees. Seekers have taken their passion for trees around the world or even into space. Community builders have undertaken the remarkable work of knitting people together under an arboreal canopy. It's impossible to reduce anyone's kinship with trees to a one-word label, but I hope my classification speaks to the diverse possibilities a life among trees can offer. As a hobby, tree collecting would seem to pose a major barrier to entry. Access to land. Any collection takes up space, but surely no one is greedier for land than a tree collector. The story behind many of the world's most extraordinary private tree collections begins like this. Back in the 70s, we bought 30 acres of land and started planting. But who has the funds for 30 acres of land today? Who was able to afford it then? These questions led me to think more broadly about collectors and collecting. What about an urban tree cataloging project? Francisco Arjona began cataloging the trees of Mexico City on his Instagram account. Isn't that a collection? Cyrus Patel manages the Extraordinary Trees of Stanford project, which not only tracks every tree on Stanford's campus, but looks back in time and tracks every tree that ever grew on campus. It's a collection because someone took notice and started counting. Some collections, of course, take up very little space. You can pick up acorns in your neighborhood and sprout them in pots on your balcony, and I've met collectors who do that. You can graft 40 varieties of fruit onto a single tree, like artist Sam Van Aken. Some people collect pine cones or leaves or wood specimens. You can store those in a few boxes under your bed. But confronting the question of who has land and who doesn't, and why, led me to the most meaningful stories in this book. Joe Hamilton plants trees on land passed down from his formerly enslaved great-grandfather. What started as an 888-acre parcel at the end of the Civil War had shrunk down to 44.4 acres by the time Hamilton and his family inherited it. The
Sample complete. Ready to continue?